If you want to move up for a better view, wheel white, come closer. If everyone can find a seat, we're going to get started. Please make sure you have a clicker. All right, good evening. Thank you all very much for taking the time to be here. We know your time is precious on a Monday evening, so we're happy that you're here. My name is Jane Zook. I am a member of our community engagement team, and I'm going to be your MC tonight. On behalf of Colorado Springs Utilities, we appreciate you contributing your thoughts and opinions on planning our energy futures. This is my community utility, and also yours, so we hope that you have a lot of input for us this evening. Before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping items. Want to make note of the exits. There are exits right behind us on either side of the room, and one to your right. We also have restrooms out that door there and a drinking fountain. At the end of our evening tonight, we're going to do a feedback form, and it is in digital format in a QR code. If you have a smartphone, it's kind of like a coded menu. And then we also have a paper format. That feedback form we're going to use to determine how to best do these meetings in the future, so that's really important. And most importantly, if you finish that feedback form and leave us your email address, you will be entered to win a free smart thermostat. We promise we won't use your email for any spam. We'll send you some important updates on meetings like this and Colorado Springs Utilities projects. So please make sure to fill that out. I'd like to recognize a few people in the room. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. So I'd like to recognize so we have some new board members, utilities board members, and one of our new board members is here, Mr. David Lineweber. If you could stand up. We also have Mr. David Donaldson. If you could stand up. Mr. Mike O'Malley. And Ms. Hengen. In the back there. Members of our executive leadership team are here this evening. Our CEO is Travis Steele. Here. And our chief, you're hiding over there, our chief operations officer, Summer Meese, is
That's what I do best.
We also have members of our executive leadership team who are here, if you could raise your hands. So we have Mr. Tristan Gerhardt, Ms. Lisa Barreto, Mr. Mike Franklin.
Challenge you.
All right, so we also are flanked by a lot of experts here who are very well versed in energy efficiency and planning. There are a lot of opportunities this evening to visit with these folks, so introduce yourself, make sure you ask a lot of questions. There's going to be a chance this evening to hear a short presentation, and after that, we're going to follow that up with a question and answer session. And we want to make sure that everybody gets their questions answered this evening, so there'll be a chance for that, and we'll have you step up to the mic so everyone can hear that. We also will have 3 stations at the end as you're leaving and adjourning at 7 o'clock. We'll have a station over here to learn a little bit more about our energy efficiency rebates and incentives. We are going to be introducing our Clean Heat Plan law legislation, and there's some information back there about what that entails, to include information on heat pumps and electric ranges and electric water heaters. And then over here are proposed additional resources for our energy generation. So you can visit back there to learn more about that. So lots of chances to engage this evening. All right, we also want to hear your voices with these iClickers. So we're going to be doing some polling questions this evening, and we're going to kick it off with a question. So if you could just turn your clicker on, it'll glow green on the top. And when you see that question turn up, would you like the clicker? All right. Gotta hear your voice. All right, so aim your clicker at this white receiver. Your inclination is to aim it at the screen, but aim it right down here. So in consideration of energy use, which of these is your top concern? A, reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, community air quality, it is available when I need it, maintaining low costs, or increasing the use of renewable energy. And as you are clicking your answer, you only get one, unfortunately. You can see that timer going. At the top left of the screen, you can see everyone starting to answer there. I think we have just under 50 people in here. And C, it is available when I need it. Followed by D, maintaining low costs. All right, we'll have some more opportunity for some polling questions as the night progresses, but now I'd like to introduce to you our main speaker this evening, and it is David Longry. He is Manager of Energy Planning and Innovation. And come on up and welcome David.
Well, thank you so much, everybody. As Jane mentioned, my name is David Longry, and I manage our electric and gas resource planning team. And so my team, some of them are here today, plan our city's future electric and gas supply. And so we're really excited today to be able to talk with you. Even more excited that you all are here so that you can hear what our future looks like and you can provide us that feedback. So as we continue to do our planning efforts, we're taking into consideration what you all would like us to do as our customer owners. So again, really appreciate you all being here. So before I jump into really our planning efforts, I wanted to chat a little bit about how we deliver electricity to you. Probably this is familiar to most of you, but wanted to spend a little bit of time to make sure you are all aware of how we get electricity here. So we have generation stations, which is the number one out here, and this has historically been our coal plants, our natural gas plants. This also includes our hydroelectric facilities, our new solar arrays, our wind fields that we have. And as we continue to grow that generation, especially as we add more renewables, we're starting to see that that generation is getting further and further away from our city, potentially hundreds of miles away from our city. So in order to get that electricity here, it's a little different as we move into our future. It's not downtown. It's not even within our service territory. It's getting further away. So we're doing a lot of projects on our transmission system. And these are those big, high voltage lines that can carry the electricity a long distance. And you'll see them sometimes overhead along the highways or as you're driving outside of the city, some of those big lines. And those are critical to our infrastructure to bring that generation into our community, but also as we generate electricity in our city, we're able to move that generation to other communities and sell that electricity to help offset our rates. And so that transmission system, you'll see a lot of the projects that we're working on are really to make that a robust system to allow us to import and export electricity. As we move closer to your house, we then transform that electricity down to lower voltage, which is about 12,500 volts when it starts getting into our distribution system closer to your home. And a lot of this part of our system, about 77%, is actually underground. So you don't see this. We appreciate that because it doesn't obstruct your view, but also it's easier to maintain and it's a higher reliable system because it doesn't get knocked over when the wind blows or when we get heavy snows. So a lot of that distribution system, hopefully you don't see, and that lack of interruption helps maintain the service at your home. And then we take that all the way into the local transformers, and these are oftentimes on a pole, or white things on a pole, or green boxes out in your front yard or underground in front of your home. And that really takes that voltage down to that 240 volts or 120 volts that you would plug in your appliances and your phones to. And so our electricity is transformed all the way through its life. Which all that equipment is planned for in our groups, taken care of by our operations folks, to again, so that we can deliver that reliable service to you all. So part of what we do through our planning process and through our daily operation is we do what we're calling grid modernization. So we're taking a grid that is old. We're about to celebrate our 100-year anniversary of selling electricity in this community, and we're modernizing that grid. And we do that through infrastructure upgrades, which I'll dive into a little bit more. But as we talk about those transformers and those substations, we need to modernize them. We need to make sure that those transformers that are getting to the end of their life are upgraded so that they do work when they're supposed to work. We're looking at distributed energy resources, and so a lot of you are installing solar on your home. We're starting to see you as our customers are now generating electricity. So we're planning for what does that look like on our distribution system. We're not the only ones generating electricity, you are as well. So we've got projects around how to interact with you and smaller scale utilities that we're looking at that we may own that aren't those large generating units that we may have had historically. Then we're also looking at different markets, and so these are energy markets, oftentimes referred to as regional transmission organizations or independent system operators, different words, but really mean the same thing. A larger group of utilities regionally get together, and as I mentioned, if we overgenerate, we'll sell to our neighbors or somebody else in a different region when we have excess capacity. That helps them bring in additional revenue, or in cases when we have lower generation on our system, then we can bring in additional generation from outside. So we'll chat about that a little bit more today as well. And then we're going to talk about our advanced utility infrastructure and how we're using our fiber network and our advanced metering to improve our system and to help you improve your usage of your electric, gas, and water. Cool. I did want to mention, sorry, I have to turn here to the screen, so don't mind that. But this picture on your right is just a sampling of the projects that we have across town. And what I love about this picture is we have projects all across our service territory and outside of our service territory. So we are taking a broad look at how we're improving our infrastructure and making sure that it's hitting every aspect of that system that I mentioned earlier. I want to highlight a few of the projects that we're working on. This is our Briargate substation. This is on pretty much at the intersection of Woodman Road and Powers. It's kind of on the northwest corner there. This is one of our substations that has both transmission and distribution. And so we just completed in February an upgrade to this substation. And that's going to allow us to bring more electricity to that part of town from our transmission system and then distribute it to that northeast part of the town that's experiencing a ton of growth, as you all are aware. We also have 4 or 5 other substation projects that we're working on, either building new substations. We're currently working on our Horizon substation, which is out by the airport. We're starting the design of our Central Bluff substations, which is on the central part of the city. We're doing a lot of substation work to transform that electricity from those higher voltages down to the voltages that we can then supply to you. We also have a lot of transmission projects. I mentioned how transmission is really key from bringing electricity from outside of our city or from our generating units to you. And so we've got projects that we're bringing from the south part of our town, actually south of our town, even below Fountain, south of Fountain, all the way back into our city, so that again we can bring that off-system generation back into our city. And then we're building transmission projects that are taking electricity from our western or from our eastern side of our borders down to the central part of the city, bringing that electricity again from that generation that we're starting to see on the eastern part of our city back downtown, so that we can go back down into the city. So again, that we can move electricity around to meet the needs of our growing city. Most of you are familiar with our new natural gas generators. These are located at the Drake Power Plant site downtown. That is in process to be fully generating in May, at the end of May here, so we're right on the edge of getting those generators set up and ready to generate. And gas generation, you'll see this later on too, is a critical part of our infrastructure. It's a critical part of our future, and this is our first step to get those gas generators to be downtown, to handle that electric load that's happening downtown. And what these electric generators do, especially these smaller ones, and these get into some of the technical terms that we use on planning, but they can turn down pretty low, so we don't have to run them at full capacity. We can turn them down when there's excess renewables on our system, or when the cloud comes over, we can ramp these units up really quickly to take care of that electrical need while our solar has a cloud coming over it until our solar can recover, for example. So these units play an amazing role in our future. And I'll talk a little bit more about what our future looks like on natural gas later on. And we also are expanding our renewable portfolio. So we see that there is a balance of renewables and natural gas in our future. And so right now we have under construction our 175 megawatt Pike solar array that's southeast of our city. And then we also are in negotiations for two 100 megawatt 4-hour batteries that will be constructed within our city. And those batteries are really going to play an important role as we have excess generation on our system in certain circumstances. We can store that energy and then use that energy when it's most needed. And one of the times that we're seeing that need is really at nighttime when everybody comes home, the sun's starting to set, the wind hasn't picked up at nighttime, but everybody comes home. That's when you're starting to do your laundry, that's when you're plugging in your vehicles, and that's when you're living life. And so we're really seeing these batteries becoming an important part of filling in that space between renewables or between our solar and wind. It's also where we see these natural gas generators playing a big role in our future portfolio. And then we are planning to put out a request for proposal later this summer, which is going to, based on this resource plan that you'll see, add a lot of additional solar, wind, and some additional battery. So again, we see the value of adding additional solar, adding additional wind, and when you look at the numbers, it's pretty massive how much we're going to add to our system to be able to provide that electricity as much as we can, relying on that combination of portfolio between our renewables and natural gas to serve our load, which I'll talk about in just a moment as well. I hit on this a little bit when we talk about these energy markets. And really what you can see here is Colorado is kind of in the middle there in that kind of yellow-green striped area. We, last year in August, joined the Southwest Power Pool's Western Imbalance Service. And so basically that gives us access into the Southwest Power Pool, and so you can see where their footprint is within this map. And so what we're doing is expanding our footprint and our access to those additional resources that we may not own, again, to help us navigate this transition and to help us make economic decisions to maybe reduce our generation when somebody else has cheaper generation on the system, or vice versa. When we're producing cheaper generation, we're able to sell that into that market and again, be able to lower our revenue requirement, which ultimately lowers rates by being able to do that. We are continuing to look down these different paths of joining what they then call like a regional transmission organization, where you can expand into the services that organization provides. You get larger access to transmission. So as a Colorado Springs Utilities, we're looking at all of these different options to make sure that we can reliably serve cost-effective utilities. So our advanced utilities infrastructure, so mentioned earlier, we're working on our fiber network, and really what we're seeing with this fiber network is that's our communication backbone for all of these resources. As I mentioned, our generation resources are expanding out beyond our service territory, and they're expanding to your homes. And so for us to be able to operate our system, we need to be able to communicate very quickly at speed of light with all of these devices to make sure that we can understand what's going on our system. And that ties into our advanced metering infrastructure. And many of you may have had your meter updated from us. But part of that advanced metering is going to allow you greater visibility into your usage, which ultimately you have then the option to reduce your usage of all of your utilities, lower your bill. It also gives us a better understanding of how you all are using your electricity and all the other services so that we can better serve you through those. So we see those two working together to really provide that information into how our system's operating into the future. And then finally, microgrids is a word that's used a lot, and microgrid really means typically a small area or an area within the town that can isolate or come off of our system if there was a grid emergency, so they have their own generation or battery storage and can disconnect for our system for a short amount of time. And so having this communication network would allow us as a community to build these segments of microgrids around town so that if there were a grid issue that we could isolate a portion of town, keep that part of town up, some of that critical infrastructure in that part of town, while we make adjustments to our city like we had in the large windstorm. We can isolate part of our system and again, keep as many folks within power as often as possible. So again, that communication is really critical to being able to do all the things we need to do in this new energy future. So with that, we're going to have Jane come back up here and do another question.
All right, make sure your clicker is on. We'll start the polling. So what is your top priority related to energy? Is it A, environment and stewardship, B, innovation, C, cost, D, reliability, or E, diversity of generation resources? And you only get to pick one. And reminder, for those of you in the back, you might have to hit your answer again and aim it at this tiny white box up here. Okay, good. Go to the sidearm. D, reliability, followed by a tie for A, B, and C.
I was hoping for more E, but I didn't win. No, this is great. Thank you for that feedback. That does really help us in our planning. And when we look at our planning, there are a lot of factors that we have to consider. And a lot of those factors are competing. And so helping to establish some of these priorities is the job of this community. So it's really great to hear how reliability is so important to you. Hopefully we convey that reliability is important to us as well, along with those other items. So some of you mentioned the environmental aspect of things. There is a lot of regulatory legislation out there that is around environmental issues right now. And so some of the key, we're going to take on two today that really impact how we do electric planning. The first one is our clean energy law. And so this requires electric utilities to reduce their carbon emissions by 80% from 2005 levels. So we've grown a lot since 2005 as a community, but we have to reduce back to 2005 levels and then an additional 80% on top of that. So this law that has passed that we're working towards is a big lift for a utility company, and especially one that's growing as a city, like as much as a city we are. So when when this first came out, Colorado Springs Utilities made a decision to voluntarily submit a clean energy plan that showed how we will align to this law. And what that showed basically was that we will retire our Drake power plant by 2023, which has already been done, and then retire our Nixon coal plant by 2030. And so by making some of those changes and then operational changes on how we operate our units, we are able to demonstrate compliance with this 80% reduction, even with that growth that you're seeing. And everything that we're presenting, all of the models that we've ran, the portfolios that we've studied, meet this requirement. So everything that you're going to hear today meets that 80% reduction by 2030. The second one is our clean heat plan. And I'm going to dive into this one a little bit more in just a bit, because there's also a submission that we have to do for our clean heat plan. But because the clean heat plan is setting targets to reduce our carbon emission on our natural gas system, we are now looking at potentially shifting that gas load that we've typically heated your home with gas, now potentially moving that to electric. That's causing an increase in electric load, all while we're trying to reduce the emissions from our electric system. So both of these laws are very important for us to be able to meet, but they all add challenges to each other. So part of this is 4% by 2025, and there is a cost cap with this, so we do not have to spend more than that cost cap to try to achieve these targets. And then by 2030, there's a 22% reduction target and a cost cap of 2.5% of our gas retail revenue. So I'll touch on that just a little bit more, but it's an important factor of our electric planning, even though it has to do with our gas system. Also wanted to address the transition from coal to gas. We've received a lot of questions from many of you that registered and submitted your question ahead of time. We do really appreciate that. We are looking to reduce our carbon emission, as I mentioned, to meet that 80% But we're doing that through multiple steps, and one of those is adding natural gas generation. So as you can see from the screen, natural gas has a lot of benefits over coal. It has less sulfur, it has less nitrogen, 50% less carbon dioxide. So it is the least intensive fuel that we can use to generate electricity. And we believe that, like I mentioned earlier, paired with renewables is the way that we can meet these emission requirements while still maintaining a cost-competitive and reliable service. And so that's really that transition to gas, and some people have asked, we're shutting down coal to put natural gas. We believe that that is the best approach to meet all of these parameters in our planning framework and to provide you the best service. And again, it's a valuable resource from how we can operate our system. So when we talk about planning, we use megawatts for our planning, and so I wanted to take a little bit of time to explain what a megawatt hour can be. So a megawatt is the amount of power used over an hour, and so this is just kind of a fun graphic that I have to actually read here. But within a 1 hour time frame, as we're producing 1 megawatt, that is enough power that will keep a refrigerator cool, keep all your food cold for 3 months. You can download 133,000 songs, brew 2,400 pots of coffee, host 600 Super Bowl parties. I had no idea Super Bowl parties use so much electricity. You can charge 5,556 iPhones and power a traffic signal for 3 months. And so I hope that kind of just gives you a scale of all the things that use our system and what that could look like. So when we talk about that again, a megawatt is what we talk about, it's 1,000,000 watts. So a lot of times your house, if you look at a light bulb, they use between 5 and 40 watts now. We can power 1,000,000 of those, or 1,000,000 1-watt bulb. So hopefully that gives you a little perspective of what we're planning around. So I use that to look at a more typical engineering graphic here, where we talk about how much is our peak load. So when we do planning, we look at that 8,760 hours that occur in a year. We plan for every hour to make sure you have electricity there. But we also plan for that single hour in a year that you use the most amount of electricity. And so you can see on the left, the blue, also that turns out well for you all. On the blue, that's our historical peak day. So that's the most electricity we use in a single hour historically in those years. As you can see, we transition to the yellow. This is what we're forecasting for 23 through 2050. And so you can see that's a pretty big jump in that peak load that we're designing around. And this is really how we size the amount of generation that we need on our system, is to make sure on that peak day, when everybody's using the most amount of electricity, we have resources in our portfolio. And so you can see as we jump to 2050, you're nearly doubling the size of our generation need at that time. So quite a feat that we're working towards as a community to make sure that we can supply those needs. So through this planning update, we also went through our power plants, our existing power plants, and we always look at this when we're planning. What's the cost to operate those plants? What's the cost to maintain those plants? What other resources could potentially serve that mission of that resource better or differently? And so as we're transitioning into this new energy transition, into this new energy future, we evaluated our Birdsall power plant, and that's the power plant that's there off of North Nevada and Fillmore. You've kind of seen it. My kids say it looks like the Titanic. You look at it a certain way, so that helps ring a bell. We've moved those retirement dates up from 2035, which was our plan in the 2020 Sustainable Energy Plan. We moved those up to 2025 for 2 of the units, and then 2027. So that whole plant will be decommissioned if this plan is finalized by those times, and we'll be down at a gas plant. But one of the things that we talked about and get questions on is, again, retiring different plants, and then you build a different new plant. This plant is old. It was built in the 50s. It's running off of our local distribution company. So actually the same gas that you all use, we feed this gas. There's different gas supplies that we can use that are a little bit more efficient for some of our supply. And because of the age of this plant and how it operates, we've basically done an evaluation and found that it's a more effective way for us to deliver you utilities by retiring these plants and then replacing that generation capacity with other resources, including additional gas as well as our renewables. And there's been no change to the Nixon coal plant that's still going to be retired. We have up here by the end of 2029, same things by 2030. So all of that planning, so that is what we do, big staff for many years, not big staff, it's really small staff, but for many years we do all this planning, and it all boils down to this graphic really is our proposed additions through 2050. So now this graphic that you're seeing here is through 2050. Our study period, when you go to the back, if you look at that, that's just through 2030, but we wanted to show you the big picture of where we're aiming. But let me start on the left side is that P1, it's our portfolio 1. We really looked at if we didn't set any constraints on our model, other than the basic inputs that we put in, what would be the cheapest way to deliver power? And that is really what portfolio 1 looks like. And you can see what makes it less expensive is also the fact that it only has an additional 1,880 megawatts. And I say only, but right now we only have about 1,200 megawatts of generation, and so we're, even in that portfolio, adding a significant amount of generation. But what we realize that you don't have unlimited resources, you can't do whatever you want, there's constraints that we have to put on our model. So we took into consideration some of those constraints we see in our future, and so we did some adjustments, and that really came up with portfolio 2. And so this is really the simplest way that we can do it while still meeting some of those constraints. But then as we progress through this, we recognize that our city continues to grow. And there are a lot of federal incentives out there for some of these high-tech companies. And Colorado Springs is a pretty amazing place to live. We have reliable, cheap utilities, and so we're seeing a lot of potentially these larger customers, these tech companies coming out, Department of Defense, trying to move to Colorado Springs. But when they come to us, we want to say, yes, we have the electricity to meet what you're asking us for. So our executive leadership team made the decision that we're going to build for this future that we see coming our way. And so we added additional load on top of our initial plan that allows for these larger customers, a group or however many that come, to be able to be supported by our electric system. And so that jumped us over to P3. And that is what we are moving forward as our recommendation for the portfolio we build. Excuse me. So you can see that is requiring 3,046 additional megawatts of resources to be built onto our system. So a pretty big task in front of us, but I think we're able to do it. And then P4, we looked at is if we didn't do natural gas. So if we said the natural gas generators that are going down at that Drake side are the last natural gas generators we install, what would that look like? At this point, the only options that we're really evaluating are more your traditional renewables, and I'll hit on some of the other technology in a bit. But if you look at that kind of what's commercially available, what's feasible right now, you'd have to build 4,530 megawatts of additional resources if we were not to do the natural gas generation. That also has a significant amount of cost. So what our analysis is showing is while we're building natural gas generation, that one of the main reasons is that reliability factor, and that we can do that in a more cost-effective way than trying to create a similar approach with an all-renewable portfolio. So this matches the graphic back there if you want to take a closer look at it, but this really just shows what those resources look like through 2030, helps kind of identify what we're initially thinking we're going to build. I mentioned we've got the 175 Pike Solar that's under construction right now. We've got the 200 megawatts of battery underway. But we're also on top of that looking at an additional 525 megawatts of solar, an additional 100 megawatts of battery, can't see that far, 625 megawatts of wind, and 350 megawatts of new gas generation. And again, this is all in service, online operating before the end of the decade. And so you can also see with the pie chart, you like the percentages of each of those resources, of those additional resources. So with that, we want to ask you another question.
All right. So what is your knowledge of battery storage? A, I've never heard of it. B, I know a bit about it. C, I'm very familiar with it. D, I would like to learn more. Or E, I am a battery expert. experts in the house. I like it, I like it.
You can come talk to us afterwards.
Yes, helps out. So close tie, D, I would like to learn more. And B, I know a bit about it. All right, thank you.
So thank you for that. We recognize that battery, as I mentioned, is going to be a big part of our future, both at the utility scale, things that we own, and then as you start to see batteries being installed at people's homes, and helping us all as a community understand how we can best utilize that storage to, again, shift those electrical needs in your home and then on the grid as a whole. So I wanted to jump into our clean heat plan and spend a little bit more time on that. But Jean has to come back up here.
We want to know.
We want to know all this about you.
Are you familiar with Colorado's Clean Heat Plan law? A, yes, B, no, or C, I hadn't heard of it until today. Some of you may have to reach again back there. I think we have about 47 folks with eye clickers. All right, yes,
That is excellent.
that's excellent.
Yeah,
Pleasant surprise.
yes, we're excited that you know about it, and we want to provide you a little bit more information on it and how utilities is moving forward with our proposed clean heat plan that we will submit to the state. So I covered this just briefly, but I'll hit it again. It's again by 2025, needing to hitting a target of 4% carbon reduction from our natural gas system. Again, with that 2% cost cap. 2030 reduced by 22% with that 2.5% cost cap. So right now we're working through all the different portfolios that we could potentially meet that, both with meeting the targets and meeting those cost caps. We then have to submit a plan to the state by August 1st, outlining how we are going to move forward with our clean heat plan. And so part of that process is understanding the targets and what we're trying to hit as a community, getting your feedback on how we should move forward with this clean heat plan, and showing you what we're planning to do and how that can best align to our community's needs. So just a quick highlight of how we use natural gas. As you can see, at the very top of this, you can see it's a little bit blue and snowy out there, but cooking and other uses of natural gas are about 3%. Very small portion of your usage is actually for cooking. And then you move to the left there, water heating is the second biggest, so about 30%, really, again, doing dishes and taking showers. And then you can see the big part of how you use gas is, on average, is heating your home. And so as we're looking at changing how we use different resources in the future, when we start looking at how do you reduce our natural gas usage, which is one of the key ways to reduce your carbon emissions, is we're going to look at those two big parts of the pie, home heating and water heating. And so there are several ways that we can accomplish this by potentially changing how you heat your home and how you heat your water. And that process is called electrification. And so we're going to ask you about electrification.
So electrification can be a strategy to meet emission reduction requirements. Which of the following would you consider? A, purchasing an electric vehicle. B, electrifying space and or water heating. C, electrifying appliances such as your oven or stove or fireplace. D, all of the above. Or E, none of the above. D, all of the above. Followed by a close none of the above.
But that is kind of what we expect to do. There are very much two sides of this story of electrification. So electrification is just one of those tools. I wanted to hit on a few of the other ones. So energy efficiencies, as we make appliances more efficient, they reduce their both emissions and their overall usage. So this is something that we are hitting on, and we'll talk a little bit about that today, of how we can help you, help us lower our emissions by getting more efficient appliances. That beneficial electrification, which I mentioned, That is going to be a tactic that we want to use and we need to use to help us accomplish this. And so it is going to take those folks that really want to electrify portions of their house, doing that in a way that's beneficial. And really that means, is it cost effective? Is it reducing emissions? Is it reducing natural gas usage? Certain electrification options are not the way we want to go. And so we want to make sure collectively we're doing electrification when appropriate, when it's beneficial. And we want to be here to help you with that. So we have some resources for that as well. And then from our own system, we are looking at how we can find leaks early and make sure we stop leaks on our system, and that further reduces our emissions. So we're looking at stuff internally of how, as Colorado Springs Utilities, how can we be contributing to this overall reduction, and then how can we make our system overall better. And then as we progress, as we move through the Clean Heat Plan, we're looking at some other opportunities. And that's really looking at biomethane or renewable natural gas. How can we partner with maybe even dairy farms or cattle farms, and how can we potentially, create a renewable natural gas that helps them and helps us? There are different options for renewable natural gas. That technology is still growing, but that's something that we are looking at. How do we utilize that to reduce our emissions? Green hydrogen, that's another one. That hydrogen is a big buzz right now. If you're following in the industry at all, and so it's something what we're looking at. Green hydrogen is made with water, and so as you're aware, this is Colorado, and we have some water constraints as well, and so we've got to balance all four services, all of these resources to figure out what's the best technology for us. But hydrogen could have a role in our future that we can talk about here in just a minute as well. And then recovered methane, and so there's basically recovered methane is something we can do. There's some limitations within the law of how much we can recover off of methane, but we're looking at different opportunities everywhere we can to find out how we can best align to these targets while making sure that's the most cost-effective and beneficial to you as well. So with that, we'll come back up.
All right, which of these energy efficient products are you most interested in? A, energy efficient heating and air conditioning. B, energy efficient windows. C, energy efficient insulation. D, energy efficient appliances. Or E, smart thermostats. All right, A for the win. Energy efficient heating and air conditioning, followed, it looks like, by smart thermostats. Chance to win one tonight.
That's great, thank you for that. So with that, we have opportunities to, again, partner with you to help us. So we want to help you help us. And so part of that is our demand side management programs. We have a team that works to find best ways to help you improve the efficiencies of your home. And so that is covered back at this table over here. You can see Heather, you can raise her hand. We want you to visit us afterwards. I'm not going to read through all these programs, but we have a lot of programs. We have a lot of information on these programs, and we just encourage you, if this is of interest to you and you are wanting to help make sure your house is more efficient, or talk more about how we can help you electrify some of those pieces. Go back there. We have a brochure. We have QR codes. You can take us to your website. You can help you fill out those rebates and make yourself more efficient. And so that's, again, you all play a role in how we as a community reduce our carbon emissions. And so we encourage you to look at ways that we're offering that. So hit on a few of these. So you guys mentioned air conditioning. We weren't totally surprised that was going to be a big one. So we do have some rebates on energy efficient furnaces, but what we're really trying to talk with people about is heat pumps. And what a heat pump does is it can cool and heat your home. The name doesn't do itself justice, but this can be a replacement for your air conditioning unit and your furnace. So when your furnace goes out, we encourage you to understand what a heat pump is and potentially look at replacing that furnace with a heat pump. This is part of that electrification strategy that in appropriate ways can be done and really help you within your home, and then again, help move some of that load off of our natural gas system. So we have some opportunities on the heat pumps and then the cold climate heat pump. We mentioned the smart thermostat program. This is a big one. This is going to help a lot more on the electric side. But again, we're looking at these two services are very interconnected. We have some rebates on our thermostat. We also then have our peak energy rewards, where you can get an annual credit, and that really helps us take that peak hour that I mentioned earlier and move your load potentially off that peak hour, so we don't have to build as much generation for 1 hour a day. We can do different things like pre-cool your home when there's more electricity on the grid, and then make sure your air conditioner is not working during that peak hour, and then that's going to help us reduce that bill we need to do for that, again, 1 hour within a day. So we have some opportunities there. And then I mentioned again from the gas, it was space heating and cooling, and then water heating. And so we're looking at, again, heat pumps for your water heater, and some opportunities there to, again, shift that load from that gas system to our electric system. And then if you don't want to move off the gas system, we've got some opportunities for, again, that more energy efficiency opportunities for those appliances. And with that, I think we have our last question.
All right, to learn more about the state's clean heat and sustainable energy plans, what would be helpful to you? A, in-person discussions with experts. B, public meetings like this. C, online materials at csu.org. Digital and video resources, or E, newsletter or other written materials. That does not help us. Okay, that's good. All right, so C and D, online materials at csu.org, or digital and video resources, YouTube. Okay, thank you.
And I didn't get the lowest score, so I didn't take it totally personal. That doesn't mean you love it. Do you want to hit this real quick?
All right, so there's the QR code to fill out the feedback form. We're going to leave this up here. You can scan this. If you do not have a smartphone or you do not want to scan this, you can fill out a paper form. We're going to close this survey later this evening, and we will draw a winner tomorrow. So remember, you have to leave your email address in order for us to contact you if you have won the smart thermostat. It's an Ecobee, and good luck. Paper forms are over here if you want to fill those out, and the QR code is also on this sheet. Thank you for your feedback.
So with that, we're going to transition to our question and answer time. So we're going to sit. I'm going to have Summer Meese come up. She's our Chief Operations Officer. We wanted to sit to make this a little bit less formal and hear from you, answer some of the questions that you have for us. We've got 2 microphones that will alternate if you want to walk up and wait in line, and we'll bounce back and forth to make sure that we get to answer the questions that you have for us.
And Dave, before we start, a lot of you who pre-registered, thank you for answering questions that you have for us. There were quite a few great questions. We selected a few of those. So we'll start with one. And that first one is, what is Colorado Springs Utilities' plan for small modular nuclear reactors, or SMRs?
Yeah, so we appreciate it. So we get a lot of questions on this, and we love that you all are paying attention to this, because we do see this technology as a potential future generator within our portfolio. Right now, there's really about 2 pilot small modular reactors out there that we're watching. None of them have been commercially operational yet. We're wanting to make sure that we understand that technology, where it's going to go, where that cost is ultimately going to land. We do believe as they make it through those pilot projects that the cost will go down. Those first, anytime you do something for the first time, it's usually more expensive. So we're actively watching it. We do put SMRs into our model based on its current assumed in-service date, which we don't have until 2040 right now, being a little bit conservative, understanding that the technology needs to continue to mature. The regulations around small modular reactors needs to mature a little bit. And right now, in the current scenario, our model is not saying that that's the right solution for Colorado Springs Utilities at this time. But as we continue to watch that, as we refine our inputs around those reactors, we do see that as something we need. What can be great about that for a community like us is it can work 24/7. It's not, it's a dispatchable resource and it's a carbon-free resource. So we are encouraged what the industry is doing, what the FERC is doing around trying to improve permitting those type of units. So we do see that as part of our future. And I did want to mention the Department of Energy published a report that identified the Rain-Nixon coal facility as a potential site for small modular reactors. And so again, we see that as we've got the infrastructure there, we've got the space there. If this were to come to Colorado and come to our service territory, we do believe we have an amazing site for a reactor like that.
Okay, and the other question that we pulled is, what is Colorado Springs Utilities' plan for hydrogen use? You mentioned it earlier.
Yeah, I mentioned hydrogen. So we see a couple of uses right now. One is on the natural gas system. So as part of meeting our clean heat plan, there's some potential to blend hydrogen into our local distribution company, into that local distribution system. And then that actually gets delivered to you. So that would reduce the emissions on our natural gas system. But there are limits on how much we can mix right now, really around the appliance orifice. So hydrogen is a little finer material than what you're seeing in your traditional natural gas. And so with the current appliances the way they are, we need to make sure that when you burn that gas, you're burning it efficiently so we don't have additional emissions. So there's going to be a limit that we're studying of how much we can potentially blend into our system. So we see that one is helping us meet our clean heat plan. We also, as we talk about natural gas generators, we're looking at how can our natural gas generators burn a mixture of hydrogen. Right now, the technology is still emerging. Some of our units can burn a small mixture of hydrogen. We have a couple of units that could be converted to burn a larger mixture of hydrogen. So we're looking at that as a potential fuel source for these natural gas generators. That was the ones we're installing now, some of the gas ones we have, the generators we currently have, what that looks like. I think, as I mentioned, the side of hydrogen that we as a community, really a region, need to figure out is how do we get hydrogen here? We may not be the best hydrogen producer, given our water supply, but with some of the federal governments out there, with some of these hydrogen hubs being built, within, close to our boundaries of our state, potentially there's ways to get that hydrogen to us that's produced someplace else within the country. So that's a portion of it.
Okay, so we'll open it up now for some question and answers. And we have not only David and Summer up here to answer questions, but a lot of experts. So we'd like for you to come up to either microphone at the front of the room if you have questions.
My name is Paul Mayani. I'm very happy what you're doing, but I'm very disappointed that you have not addressed any hydroelectricity. We have ample amount of water coming down. We have lots and lots of pressure regulator to reduce the pressure to provide to the homeowners. I really like you to focus more on hydroelectricity.
Thanks, Blue. You were served on UPAC during our 2020 IRP. So thank you for that. So hydroelectric is still part of our future. We are evaluating it. Some of the things that we are doing actually with our water group within our next water resource plan is they're evaluating 2 sites for potential hydroelectric. Part of, we do have the gradient, we do have the water in some cases. One of the theories that always is brought up is Rampart Reservoir. It's a big reservoir. That water has to come down the hill and go someplace. Right now, it's limited by the capacity of our water treatment plant and then our distribution system. So we're only able to run as much water through that system as that can be supported by the downstream area. So, but we are looking at potentially Northfield and Nichols, which are reservoirs below Rampart Reservoir, looking at what could potentially be a hydro facility or a pump storage facility within that watershed. We are also looking at one of our western slope reservoirs that we're evaluating. Could that potentially be used for hydro? The downside of some of those that get really far off of our system is we have to have that transmission to get that electricity back to us without paying a fortune to go across other services. And then there's another one that's actually being announced before you come. Another one being announced in Fremont County, down just north of Kansas City. I think they posted on FERC's website that they were looking at about a 500 megawatt pump storage facility down there. So those are opportunities that we will evaluate based on, does that come to maturity of the project, and can that compare with some of the other resources financially and just the viability of getting it here.
Those are very good ideas, but what I was looking for is on the distribution side. We have so many pressure reducing stations
Yep.
because we have various zones and we're burning free energy. We can do the mini,
Yep.
generations.
So, yes, I didn't know that part of it. Yeah, the micro hydros, we had done a study a few years ago to look at that. And basically what that is as we break pressure as it comes down the hill to lower parts of our city, there's a lot of pressure that builds up. We do have regulating valves that breaks that pressure. There are little micro turbines that can be used to break the pressure and then turn that electricity. It's relatively small in the scheme of the generation we need. We are still evaluating that. One of the initial challenges that we found was getting that electricity back to the grid. You've got to have the transformer, you've got to have it in a location that can support that. So there's some intricacies of that, but that is a study that we continue to talk about how do we make that work, especially as we're looking at being the most efficient in how we make electricity.
I saw a lot of percentage reduction goals and percentage increase goals. How do you measure, as you're moving through the plan, the efficiencies and inefficiencies of the approach, and then the factors you use to affect changes in the game plan?
I'm not sure I follow the question totally.
So this is a plan which has a lot of goals and objectives. So when I look at goals and objectives, I go, how do you meet them? And when you determine if you are or are not meeting them, and how do you deal with the efficiencies and inefficiencies, and then adjust? When do you do that?
Yeah, so I think at a high level, what I say, when we do our resource planning for all four services, we update our resource plans every year on an annual basis. And so that's our time that there's a really concentrated effort of saying, we thought we would be X, Y, and Z on building these resources, or we assumed that this technology would be in this place at that time. And so we reevaluate that. We're looking at it more frequently than annual, but we do a formal analysis of all that every year to look at just that. Is the path that we're going down still the path that we need to be going down? What has changed in that time that we need to continue to stay course or modify slightly? If you look at where we are today, 2020, which was not too long ago, June 2020 is when we approved our last integrated resource plan that set that electric future. And that looked not a ton different than this, but it didn't have as many resources. So we've been monitoring the amount of growth that we've seen. The Clean Energy Plan had some regulatory changes after we approved our IRP. The Clean Heat Plan became law after we approved our IRP, just within the short amount of time. And so as part of this process, we saw that and now made these changes that have added a lot of additional generation because of those changes. So hopefully that answers that there is a process that we have in place to evaluate all
You
of
do
our
have
systems.
measurables, in
Yes,
other words?
yes.
Okay.
Good evening. So there's a lot of initiatives on a legislative level to push energizing our homes, but also our businesses as well. So I guess I'm curious if as they're pushing these new requirements, are they talking to you on your ability to support that? And as I look at some of your projections, I see when you see your use projections are doubles, that tells me that's probably what that is. But I guess my question is, if we look at it on a commercial level, we look at how to support that. Are you prepared? Is the infrastructure prepared to support that? And if not, what are you planning to do?
I can answer one point, maybe the electric infrastructure. So we have an amazing group as part of utilities that actually, from the government affairs standpoint, is in Denver, is in Washington, helping to ensure that what we're seeing in reality down here delivering utilities is being unheard in those different places as they're making rules that we're there at the table to ensure that what we see from a utility company is at least being presented. And that team's done a great job of adjusting a lot of these rules and laws to understand that we can't just snap our fingers and get this accomplished. And they've made some success in how some of these recent legislation has been written, even the Clean Heat plans, how they've been written to help us balance what we can do in reality from a planning standpoint, from a technology standpoint with some of the rules. The rules are definitely pushing the edge, and I think the industry is concerned. I think that we have been doing a good job of voicing that concern in areas, with some of those technologies. But I think there is still some more growth at those regulatory bodies of how does that actually work in reality. And then someone can maybe explain it.
Me and my Bob Barker microphone. I think you're talking more on the economic development and city growth as the second half of that.
Well, I'm really talking on a commercial level on what it requires to get this done, because our calculations, on a large commercial level, it's not there.
Right. And I think that we all have seen unprecedented growth in the city, right? Development from an economic perspective or just housing. And I think that's why you see on David's graphs why that's doubling in such a short period of time, is we realize that this is going to keep happening. There's incentives to move here. How do we get ahead of that so that when people do want to build whatever it is, a facility, a house, the infrastructure is there, and that we can make sure we have reliable power and utilities for them. So I think that's part of what they're putting into that as a growth model, and maybe elevating a little bit on steroids just to make sure we're prepared and we're ahead of that curve, where in the past we haven't had a whole lot of growth, so we've just kind of maintained, right? And we knew we had what we had, but to keep us in that economic development space, we've got to think ahead.
And I can add too, a plug. We just launched our commercial efficiency program and for businesses. And so what that does, we offer, there's more information back there, but to help perform audits for 50,000 square foot and larger buildings, to help deal with the new building standards that the state just recently published. So we do offer some assistance there from auditing and then helping to do, again, that beneficial electrification and help you reach those goals in a way that's going to be effective for all of us. So if it does apply to you, we do have some information. And again, we want to help you accomplish that because we want it done in the best way and not just a reactive way that's going to end up hurting all of us.
I think I'd also add to that one thing. David talked about joining the SPP market and that footprint where we can wheel power to other areas. We're basically putting power in a swimming pool, and we pull from that based on what's the most economical for our community. There's discussion about that footprint even getting larger so that again we can share resources to help us. Of course, we want to make sure we're reliable and we can take care of ourselves if something happens, but that does provide some resource adequacy to help pull from other areas. If we can get hydropower from the Pacific Northwest or other areas, that helps us with keeping those rates low by having that pool overflowing.
So I've got probably really two questions. Do you see battery technology continuing to advance fast enough to where it makes sense to widely adopt it, kind of on your guys' timeline?
We believe that batteries will play an important role. The advancement of them, I think, is yet to be seen on when we get outside of the lithium-ion technology. There are a lot of pilots out there that we're watching closely. Xcel, public service company in Colorado, is doing a pilot of an iron air battery. We're looking at those different technologies as well. So the storage space is challenging because everybody's building batteries. I mean, there's supply of lithium is being challenged by the electric vehicle. We do know that we've got to find better technology for that long-term storage. I think the 4-hour duration storage is pretty well covered with the technology. But as we need that to grow longer than 4 hours to that 8 hours, 10 hours, that weak storage, that's where it's yet to be seen. That flow technology, the flow batteries, I think that's a good option. For Carson, we've been part of that. They've got a pilot for a flow battery that's being constructed for a 10-hour battery. So I think there's been a lot of progress in that industry. But as we monitor it, I think time will really tell, is it going to be the ultimate solution?
Gotcha. And then my second question is, with the source of power generation, as you mentioned, moving away from cities, so to speak, or being farther out away from cities, and being more reliant on distribution, do you see municipalities working together to build power generation facilities? I mean, this is an egregious example, but, could the Springs in Pueblo look at some plot of land out east and build a collective power facility?
Absolutely, it's an option. So we talk with all of our neighbors all the time, and we stay pretty well connected in the industry. We're finding, especially the Colorado utilities are very much in the same position we are, and looking for those. So there are some opportunities that we could potentially partner on the generation. Someone just mentioned that Southwest Power Pool, that regional transmission organization is really where you pool all your transmission. It's not as simple as it, but pool your transmission, and then that opens up those veins to get that electricity back to us if it is outside of our service territory. So we do see that it becomes a lot more regional. We'll have to evaluate as we go through our request for proposal and evaluate those different resources. We need to look at the economics, we need to look at those operating conditions of those different facilities, and they may align with other utilities, and that's the time that we would probably say, we would look at how can we partner with you on this type of resource.
Thank you.
Feel free to come on up.
Hi, my name is Len Wilkinson. I'm a retired CSU employee. And of course, I've been out of the loop for a couple of decades now. But I do continue to read about what the state legislature is dreaming up. And my concern is that we're a home rule city. Did we have to do that? And this may be more of a question for the utilities board than it is CSU management. But do we have to comply with those regulations and policies? And you are very busily putting together plans for complying with their rules and regulations. And that's a little bit of concern to me because it seems to me that the state legislature is largely running the state of Colorado utilities with all of these rules and regulations. And are you doing what's best for your customers, or are you doing things to satisfy or comply with the state regulations that aren't necessarily in the best interest of your customers? It's my concern. And like I say, maybe it's more for the utilities board question for them. And I don't know if I'm doing that noise making. I'm sorry.
So I can give you a short answer, and then if you wanted to bring that to a utility board meeting, that would be the better time to have them speak to that. But I mean, the simply put is we have legal counsel that advises us on the laws and how our home city rule apply. The ones that we're applying for, we believe, are the law, and we are going to ensure that we meet the law. And so those are the ones that we're moving forward and believe that is what we need to do, we have to do for the betterment of our community and for our customers because it's the law. But yes, definitely, I keep pointing to something. Shouldn't do that. But yes, feel free to ask at the utilities board meeting that question as well.
My name is Jack Lindberg. I have a question regarding the natural gas-fired units at the Drake site. My understanding was that that's a temporary position and that they'll be dispersed throughout the community and we'll have generating sites within the grid. Is that about right?
Wait, you're passing that one over to me.
Sure.
Got it.
I've been talking about it.
That is the case. Those are there right now. They are modular, so roughly 68% of what's on site there can be relocated. The time frame when that'll be done will be dependent on when we get the transmission line from Drake to Kelker done. It's essential for that power to be transmitted north to south. And so once that project is done, we'll be talking about the phasing and the relocation of those units and where it's best in the city to site those based on gas line, need, et cetera. So that is still the plan.
So then I would assume that you've got a general idea of location of these. You do not have the property and you have not got the gas line type stuff. That's details down the road. So what would be a timeline when I might expect to see that we would have these sites dispersed throughout the grid?
I think we're talking late in the decade. And I know we're working with the different military bases potentially as areas for those to go for resiliency of their facilities. Also looking potentially east of town, so we're closer to that gas line and helping with transmission. So there's several things still up for play there.
Great, thank you. That's very encouraging.
you know, with that said, are you looking to perhaps change any of the rules around residential solar development, or specifically allowing people to generate more than their own consumption to support this idea of export onto the larger grid?
Yes, we are currently evaluating that right now to potentially change our tariff to increase the amount that you can build on residential. Part of the reason that we've established that initial limit is we have to balance our grid with the generation that's coming from our home, and so we wanted to make sure that we've got that addressed. We're also looking at how we equitably pay you and then your bill for that electricity. Right now, some of our net metering tariffs are written in a way that you're getting a return on a reduction in your usage, but you're actually using the distribution system that we are building as ratepayers to transport that, and you're not necessarily paying for that. And so there are some of these different things we're making sure that equitably that when you are producing electricity that we're paying you fairly and not overburdening any sort of group that doesn't necessarily have solar, because you're using that distribution system to transport that electric. So it's going to come with a look of, yes, we're going to look at increasing that, but we also may be looking at how do we pay for that electricity.
So a reduced rate of what you pay for.
Potentially, yeah. We're looking at the different components of how solar from customers are going to impact our system and what that cost is going to be. But then give you the opportunity, to improve or to grow how much you put onto your home. Yes. So James, we can come back up now. So if there are no other questions, we do encourage you to ask the questions through the QR code.
I got one real quick here.
Can you go to the microphone? Sorry, you got a lot of voice, but
I probably don't need it. But, so, Craig Saywall, former CSU employee with living here. One of the biggest growing demographics in Colorado Springs is the lower middle class. And when I talk to my neighbors about having to replace their hot water heaters, gas appliances with electric, they're scared. They can't afford. It's hard enough to just replace a gas water heater with a gas water heater, and now you're asking them to replace a gas water heater with an electric one, which comes along with the cost of an electrician now having to upgrade their panels, pull new wire, to the cost of probably a couple $1,000s on top of a already expensive hot water heater. So what do you say to that? What am I supposed to tell my neighbors that are always come to me going like, hey Craig, man, you're with utilities, what's going on? And I have no answer for them.
I mean, I think that's right now what we're really trying to use the word, a couple things. Use the word beneficial electrification. There are certain homes and setups that are more effective to electrify. And so those are the areas that we want to, as we start talking about retrofitting homes, we want to evaluate first. How, that low-hanging fruit, how do you get that? That is part of where, as we look at this legislation and as we're talking with the regulators, those same points of what is this cost going to have an impact on our rate base for the individuals to have to update their system. That's part of the reason we're trying to offer some rebates. The federal government is offering rebates, so there's some money available for certain qualified people from the Inflation Reduction Act. So if you're income qualified, you can get additional funding to help move some of this.
But a lot of times with that is, yes, there's programs for the low income, but the lower middle class and the middle class, they're the ones that are getting hurt because we don't have, or they don't have programs to help those people. We're just kind of screwed at that point. And we all know how regional works with all the legislation, because all of a sudden your gas water heater goes out and now you have to apply for a permit to get a hot water heater, and regional goes back with, well, I'm sorry, you now have to have a gas or you have to have an electric. So I mean, there's a bad thing going on with this.
So it's a balance. I mean, so if you look at code that just passed right in this room, there's not a mandate on electrification from regional building. What we're doing right now is not a mandate that you shall electrify, but we are trying to find a way of, again, where are those homes that can electrify, and then as we get through that, I think that's going to be those next conversations that we have in a few years of how do you make sure that everybody can afford this if this is the direction we're going? Is the technology available? Is it cost effective for you to be able to do it? So I think the point is well taken. I think it is something that we understand and are considering, but do appreciate that. Okay.
Hello, Justin Cole, work for a nonprofit called 350 Colorado Springs. I just wanted to ask, sorry, a little bit of feedback. I just want to ask, especially towards the electrification and the democratization of costs aspect, which understandably a lot of people can struggle with. Where do nonprofits like Energy Resource Center, I'm kind of shouting you out, but Southeastern Colorado Renewable Energy Society, Solar United Neighbors, are there any working partnerships between entities that either go in and retrofit the low-hanging fruit at no cost, or can advise for renewables at a micro scale?
Sure. So I think there's always room to grow with in non-government organizations, NGOs. I'm trying not to use an acronym. For the ERC, we do partner with them for our low-income home improvements for our HEAP program. So they are a big partner with us. They're the ones that actually go in and do those installations. They help us with that auditing, with that tracking, to find those homes that it would be the most effective to do the installation, do the window. I think we've got a good program to reach out to those. I think we're always open to what are other areas that we can partner with the community to help engage all of the different groups.
Awesome, thanks so much. And also, I want to play a long list of questions. You guys answered every single one, so thanks to the both of you and everybody else for doing such a great job.
Thank you.
Any last questions? Okay, great. So we're going to try to adjourn about 7 o'clock. That doesn't leave us a whole lot of time, but here are the places where you can go to get some more information. There is a catalog of those rebates that David mentioned, and if you don't pick up a paper copy, this is all at csu.org. So acquaint yourself with one of these. There are some folks that are going to discuss Clean Heat Plan, and then our resources back there. So hopefully if you didn't get to ask your question up here, you'll be able to ask our folks in the back. And thank you again for coming this evening. We really appreciate your time and your effort to contribute. And hopefully you all filled out the survey. You've got to give your eye clickers back, yes. So make sure those are off. Thank you for the reminder. You can put